And we're back again. That was quick. Our next session is actually quite interesting as well. So we're looking at the European Free Trade Agreement with Singapore, and we have two very distinguished guest speakers today. With us is John Clarke, the Director for International Relations at the DG Agri from Brussels in the European Commission. Equally, his counterpart is Chua Loong, who's the Director for North America and Europe at the Ministry of Trade in Singapore. And we have a trade expert who actually negotiates a lot of those FTAs, Mrs. Mary Elizabeth Chelliah, who's a principal trade specialist at MTI as well. So this upcoming conversation is a review and maybe a foresight for what is going to happen with the EUSFTA. Looking back, it's been in place now for around 2 years, and looking at the communities and the opportunities now, what can be maybe further fine-tuned along the line. So I'd like to welcome Mary Chelliah, Shun Loong, and Mr. John Clarke now. Thank you. Over to you. Thank you.
Hi, John. It's a pleasure to see you again. I hope you're doing well. And Liz as well.
Pleasure's mine. Good to see you. Good to see you. Very nice.
So hi, good morning to you, John, and afternoon to you, Shun Loong. Maybe we can kickstart the session by having a short overview, maybe starting with John as to how you see the EU-Sing FTA helping this sector improve business. I'm not sure about you, but I was listening very intensely to all the German presenters just now, seeing what opportunities there are there. So maybe if you can take it away, John, first.
Yeah, with pleasure, Elizabeth, and it's very nice to see you again after the years we worked together in Geneva. So it's a real pleasure to have you chairing this session. Well, clearly the FTA is going to have an important positive impact on two-way trade between Europe and Singapore. It's already happening when it comes to industrial goods. The EU has removed its tariffs. We have new procurement opportunities. Services industries are opening up, so it's a very big boost to bilateral trade. When it comes to the food sector, the benefits are not yet there, and that's for a number of reasons. First of all, Singapore is a tariff-free country, so there are no new preferences that European companies can obtain. Before the FTA, we're already exporting food without any duties, without any tariffs. And secondly, the COVID pandemic has very much dampened agricultural and food trade between Europe and Singapore. The wines and spirits sector, the dairy sector, because of the close down of hotels, restaurants, transport and tourism, this has had an impact on what would have been, I think, increased trade between Europe and Singapore for food products. And a third reason why we have yet to see the benefits in the food sector is because FTAs don't transform the situation overnight. Our experience with many free trade agreements is that companies and traders don't change their suppliers the day after an FTA comes into force. It takes a bit of time for the market to know that there is this agreement in place with all the predictability it gives. And so it normally takes 1 or 2 years for an FTA to bed down and start to really deliver its results. Having said that, and we can come to this later in the session, there is going to be a very big expansion, I think, in the future of agri-food trade between Europe and Singapore, thanks in part to the FTA, thanks to conferences like this one, which is introducing Singaporean buyers to some very, very reputable and high quality European suppliers. So these benefits are going to come down the line. The meat sector actually is an exception. We had 8% growth in our exports to Singapore for the meat sector in 2020. So that really was bucking the trend. And I think there's a big desire from Singapore, the country, the consumers, the importers, to diversify their sources of supply. And Europe is really a safe haven when it comes to reliability of supply and safe, sustainable products.
Thank you very much, John, for that overview. Before I turn over to Shun Loong for him to give his overview, yes, indeed. In fact, in discussions with Shun Loong's team, we had actually noted that there had been an increase in canned meat products from Europe over the year. And as someone who does the family shopping, I can vouch for that. I see a lot more of canned Iberico pork, amongst other things, in our supermarket shelves. So diversification, filling in gaps, these are some of the practical issues that businesses are looking into. But we will touch on this a bit later. Let me first turn to Shun Loong to give a brief overview as to how he sees the EU-Sing as facilitating trade between Europe and Singapore, especially for food products. Shun Loong?
Thanks very much, Liz. I thought it would be useful for me to add a couple of points of optimism in addition to what John has mentioned about the prevailing situation globally. And really, from our perspective here in Singapore, I think there are three sources of optimism with regards to food exports from Europe to Singapore and our region, and also with regards to what we can look forward to beyond the pandemic. I think the first one, in terms of the EU-Sing FTA's significance at a strategic level, is that this really speaks to the very mature and strong relationship between the EU and Singapore, especially in terms of our very robust and long-standing trade and investment relationship. So just to share a couple of headline numbers, the EU is Singapore's fourth largest trading partner for goods, and that includes food exports as well, and second largest trading partner for services. The EU is also Singapore's second largest foreign investor. And Singapore, in turn, we are the EU's largest trading partner in ASEAN and the third largest in Asia in terms of investment. We are also home to over 11,000 EU companies that have presence here in Singapore, not really to serve Singapore per se, but to oversee all their economic activities across the region. So really, amidst the unprecedented challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, I think the EU-Sing FTA really sends a very strong and resounding signal of the EU and Singapore's commitment to continue upholding the open and rules-based trading system. And on top of that, this particular commitment was subsequently echoed in various ministerial statements between Singapore and EU member states, including, for instance, France and Poland. So I think at a strategic level, in terms of G2G relationship, there's a lot to celebrate. There's a very positive environment for bilateral trade investment to prosper. A second source of optimism that I wanted to talk about is really the timeliness of the entry into force of the EU-Singapore FTA. I think some of us will recall that the FTA entered into force in November 2019. This was just a couple of months right before the world started having to come to grips with the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects, not just on people, on health, but also in terms of supply chains and our economies and production chains all around the world. And I'm very pleased to share also that there are some bright sparks in 2022 to add to all the statistics that John have already shared. I think firstly, in terms of January 2020 to May 2020, this particular period is the height of the pandemic. And actually, if we look at the statistics, trade between Singapore and the EU for goods only decreased by less than 5%. And this is compared to a lot more reduction elsewhere in other parts of the world between trade partners. I'm also pleased to share that on our part, Singapore also exported a lot more pharmaceutical products to the EU during this period, no doubt supported by the EU-Singapore FTA as well, to help support the needs of frontline workers and healthcare workers in the EU during this particular pandemic period. And I would say there are many benefits yet to be fully utilized within the EU-Singapore FTA. And I'm just going to give a very, very brief run through of some of these benefits, especially those that might be relevant to folks in the meat industry. I think the first has got to do with tariff elimination under the EU-Singapore FTA. On Singapore's part, even before the EU-Singapore FTA entered into force, we had 0 applied tariffs on all agri-food products except for certain alcoholic beverages. Upon the entry into force of the EU-Singapore FTA, Singapore continued to bind our tariffs at 0. We also eliminated all remaining tariffs on products such as beer, stout, and samsung. And on the EU's part, the EU also committed to virtually remove tariffs on Singapore exports to the EU by 2024, including on some products that are of interest to our small companies here in Singapore as well. So that's number one, tariff elimination, useful for all the meat importers and exporters. Second benefit of the EU-Singapore FTA is flexible rules of origin, basically making it easier for our companies to make use of the 0% tariffs and to qualify for them. This includes on Singapore's end certain Asian food products, for instance, that you can't find in Europe, which we are keen to share with European consumers as well. A third area would be sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Under the EU-Singapore FTA, there was a shared commitment from both sides to facilitate trade in food products, while also maintaining high levels of human, animal, and plant health safety. So the provisions in the EU-Singapore FTA, they go beyond the requirements in the WTO SPS measures agreement, and they help to reduce costs for exporters. That is the intent on both sides. For example, both the EU and Singapore, we will evaluate each other's inspection and certification systems for meat producing establishments, rather than requiring each individual food processing plant to be inspected by the other party before it can export over. One more area that I think is useful to highlight, and that's got to do with geographical indications as well. Here in Singapore, we recognize the importance of geographical indications and the protection of GIs to Europe, to EU. In Singapore, we've set up a GI registry as well, basically to provide enhanced protection to European GIs that are registered here in Singapore. So just to give a couple of meat product examples as well, we have prosciutto di Parma. We also have Nürnberger Bratwurst from Germany as well. They have been registered as GIs here in Singapore and benefit from enhanced protection under the EU-Singapore FTA. So these are some of the ways in which the EU-Singapore FTA has helped to cushion the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in a very timely way in 2020, and that has led to very tangible impacts for certain food products as well. I'm just going to share a couple of interesting examples. So John has already mentioned that in 2020, EU exports of meat and meat products increased by 8% from 2019. I would like to add that in addition to that, for certain categories, for instance, for meat from sheep, that actually saw a 38% increase from 2019 in 2020. And outside of meat, just another example, this surprised me. In 2020, olive oil saw an increase of 34% in terms of EU exports to Singapore as well. So I do think that under this EU-Sing FTA, we've really started to stir up a lot of interest from Singapore food importers who are very keen to, help our Singapore consumers access, the very high quality, authentic EU food products. So that's the second source of optimism. I think the EU-Sing FTA has been very timely in helping to boost trade between both sides, including in the meat sector. A third source of optimism, and this is something that I think is something for the longer term, which is that really the EU-Singapore FTA is not just a bilateral deal, it's not just a bilateral agreement. Because as John has mentioned, I think the traders, the companies in this space, they all have established, supply chains and distribution networks in the region. And actually, the largest significance of the EU-Sing FTA is that it allows all the EU exporters to have a gateway into the larger Southeast Asian market, the larger ASEAN market through Singapore. Singapore, by virtue of where we are essentially a regional logistics and distribution node as well. And like I mentioned just now, many EU companies are based here in Singapore. I'm going to just share a couple of long-term, important trends that could be relevant for folks in the meat industry. One particular number is that, with Southeast Asia's rapidly rising urban middle class, there will be an increasing demand for food, not just in terms of quantity, but also in terms of quality. There have been estimates that the consumption of meat and seafood in Asia will increase by another 78% between 2017 and 2050. So there's a lot of growth right there and a lot of demand for EU exporters to benefit from. And specific to Southeast Asia and ASEAN, I'll also like to share a couple of numbers. In 2019, if you can beam the first slide that I shared with our organizers, EU agri-food exports to ASEAN countries, that amounted to 8 billion euros. That's about a 9.7% increase from 2018. I can only expect the trend to continue in this direction, given Southeast Asia's rising urban middle class. Another example, if we can go to the second slide, is that specific to the meat sector, we also see very encouraging signs as well. In fact, between 2010 and 2019, you can see that the exports of meat and edible meat of our products that rose from about 150 million USD to over $865 million as well. So there have been pretty interesting and encouraging signs of increases. And if I can add and zoom into a specific type of meat product, that would be poultry. I think in 2019, EU poultry exports to ASEAN countries, that saw a 19.4% increase from 2018. So I think there are really a lot of opportunity in this area and specific pockets of high growth areas as well. Singapore can serve as a launchpad for all European companies that are keen to access opportunities to serve the largest Southeast Asian market. Within the region itself, Singapore is the largest export market for EU food and drink products in ASEAN. We're also the 5th largest if you look at the whole of Asia. This is despite our pretty small population. So you can see how much we enjoy and love our food and drinks. I would just say that looking further ahead, and this is already beyond the EU-Singapore FTA, there continues to be a lot of ongoing discussions between Singapore and EU officials about how we can further deepen and take our bilateral economic relationship to the next level. And I think there are many areas of opportunities for us to explore here. I'm just going to highlight one within the food tech and agri-tech sector. Here in Singapore, we're very keen to figure out how we can contribute to solving global challenges with regards to sustainability and so on and so forth. And I think food and agri-tech is one area that we are particularly keen to look at. For instance, alternative proteins as well. It's something where here in Singapore, we launched the Singapore Institute of Food and Biotechnology Innovation in April 2020. That brings together a lot of capabilities in Singapore to try and facilitate R&D collaborations for the development of novel food. And I think we welcome possible collaborations with our colleagues in EU as well in this particular regard. I can share a couple of examples as well about how some of the EU companies are already here in Singapore to set up shop and figure out how to access and serve the rest of the region. For instance, I think in January 2020, the German company BASF established a new agricultural solutions regional production hub here in Singapore, really to supply the company's crop protection products to farmers across Southeast Asia and the rest of the Asia Pacific. Another example is a Swedish company called Oatly that develops vegan milk products as well. Recently, it also established a collaboration with a Singapore company to establish facilities to produce Oatly's popular oat drink here in Singapore, not just to sell to Singapore consumers, but also to consumers around the region as well. So I think there are a lot of sources of optimism, the three that I mentioned. And this last point, I'm also sharing about how there are new emerging opportunities for collaboration between both sides, whether between the governments or between the companies themselves. And with that, I'm going to just pause here and turn turn it back to Liz. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Shun Loong, for that very good overview of optimism. Indeed, we have seen a lot of benefits in Singapore arising from the EU-Singapore FTA. So I'll turn a bit back to John now. So John, you noted that, one of the reasons could be increasing awareness, and Singapore already has got no customs duty, so the preferential benefits are not there. But I would say that maybe if you look at the regulatory focus, the SPS and the GI points that Shun Loong raised, the FTA provides a lot better collaboration between the regulators. It facilitates the recognition of the health certs and the supply chain node. And that is also an aspect that we should not discount as we look to see how the EU-Singapore FTA actually helps imports into Singapore. And then, as Shun Loong said, the launch pad into the region. Another point, though, that I'd like to raise, especially focusing on meat. I mean, for those in the audience who have been to Singapore, you know that Singapore has very little farms, especially meat farms. We got rid of the pig farming sector in Singapore about 25 years ago. And so farm to fork is actually a bit difficult for us to meet sometimes. So one way forward, and especially after listening to the very, very interesting presentations by the German meat producers earlier, and one or two who are already doing distribution. So this is another area in which you could think about how you can use the EU-Singapore. So it's farm to fork, but using the German, because I just heard the German, so I'll use the German example, German pork products, which can then be used by our local producers who are producing the local Asian cuisine products, and then sending the products back to Europe in that way. We have canned luncheon meat, we have a few of other very interesting products that might be a way to go. So wondering, John, if you have any views on this and any other issues that you might like to touch on as we see how we are actually a two-way. So it's not just coming into Singapore and being consumed in Singapore, but also coming into Singapore and possibly then returning to Europe as we use the farm to fork to our advantage in this manner.
Thanks,
John?
Elizabeth. A lot of literal food for thought here. I think there are several things going on, and which are going to be important going forward in the next few years. My feeling is that the COVID has raised the spectre of food insecurity and food availability for the first time in many years. Yeah? And one of the results of that is, I think, a very, very strong wish to diversify our food supply, and I think that is going to be a very big factor in the years ahead when it comes to the success of this FTA in the food sector. I think Singaporean consumers and companies and the country wants to have a very diversified source of supply. Secondly, there's population growth in Asia, and the growth of a bigger middle class with purchasing power, and looking for a more diverse and balanced diet, more meat, more dairy, more protein, more fruit and vegetables. That's going to have a big impact on the FTA and trade between Europe and Singapore in the years ahead. There are several aspects of the FTA which are not actually yet in force, which I think are going to be help this sector. First of all, the GI area, there are still some rules to be put in place in the future on customs enforcement of GIs. That will be beneficial, I think, for both sides. There's a plan that Singapore and the EU would recognize trusted traders, so authorized economic operators who will, if they have a very good track record of health and safety and compliance, they'll have much faster customs procedures and so on. That I think is not yet in place, but when it is, that's going to be a very, very good, big boost, I think, for some of the companies who were in this business B2B conference this week, companies with a good track record of compliance. And then, you mentioned the regulatory dimension. We saw from the presentations earlier this afternoon that not only the government of Singapore, but also the retailers and the consumers and the private sector are looking for quality or authenticity, but also high levels of safety, animal welfare, a green footprint, if you like, on what they source. And Europe is is ideally placed, I think, to meet that very understandable demand for very safe and sustainable products, and we saw some very good examples of that. And it's my hope that in the years ahead, through the full implementation of the SPS chapter of the EU-Singapore FTA, Europe will be recognised by Singapore as effectively a single regulatory space. We are a single market. We're a customs union. We have a harmonised health and safety system for food across all of the EU, and it will be very important, I think, going forward, that the EU as a whole is recognised for its high safety standards. We are looking forward to importing Singaporean products, Singaporean food products. We negotiated in the FTA a special quota, and what we call in the jargon an origin quota, so that Singaporean companies can import meat from Europe, but also from your neighbours, and then transform them into speciality Singaporean products. It could be spring rolls, it could be samosas, it could be many things. Which, frankly, there's a very big appetite in Europe for those products, and we would very much like to see those products arriving on our shores as soon as possible. So it's really up to the, governments can only do so much. We set the framework, we set the rules, we create the opportunities, but it's now for the companies to actually exploit that niche market, which is there for the taking in the FTA. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Your last point is very pertinent, which is why exactly we agreed to have this session in what is actually a B2B marketplace, because we realize that sometimes unknowns to us negotiators, businesses are struggling to find out who their buyers are, how to raise awareness of the product. So we just start maybe with the Asian cuisine products that you referred to, which we all love to consume in Singapore. And what I usually say when I do the FTA outreach, we hope Europeans would like to consume, because after you visit Singapore, you like to eat the same thing in the comfort of your home. So how do we then use occasions like this meat, FHA meat, to raise awareness that yes, these are all the Singapore cuisine products, and maybe to address some of these SPS requirements, because sometimes it's not just an origin issue, it's more the SPS issue, because as you rightly say, everybody wants to make sure that they are eating healthy food and animals that were raised healthily, and and things like that. So that's why I raised the suggestion, especially to the meat producers listening to this, that because of the innovations that we have put in place in the FTA, think about how you can use, the farm to fork by using, maybe not just thinking of Singapore as a consumer destination, but Singapore as a destination for which your products can be used for further processing, either to go back to Europe, or as both John and Shun have touched on, move out into the Asean market. It is a rising population of 530 million, I think, by last checked it. Rising middle class, notwithstanding impacts of COVID, is still coming up. A few of the presenters earlier also talked about Vietnam and Philippines and how diversification issues. So we thought then it's a good idea to have this here, so that businesses listening are aware what are the things we have put in place. As the marketplace proceeds over this session, they can then have chats knowing that the FTA will try and facilitate. I think the other point, John, that you mentioned is very important, is also the customs aspect, and I think that is one thing which COVID has also heighten the supply chains and how there's a bit of a issue as to how goods are moving and released. So definitely we can look forward to the AEO Trusted Trader. In addition to that, I know that we are also experimenting with the Port of Rotterdam, how we can do digital paperless trade. So, you know, your documents all go in advance to Rotterdam. Rotterdam will assess the security value, and then you do advanced rulings, and the food is all released much faster. And this is very important for this sector, which is doing perishable food, because you don't really want your goods to be staying on the wharf for too long and then missing the expiry date. So these are things to look forward to. So maybe as we start to wrap up this session, maybe we can explore a little bit more on the region to region, because we know that the EU has been trying to do quite a lot with ASEAN. And so in this respect, how does the FTA that Singapore has and the upcoming RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which we hope will enter into force at the beginning of next year, further boost this relationship? Because as you come through Singapore as a distribution hub, are you all looking to see maybe to have a bit more cold chain facilitation? We have the very famous New Zealand lamb moving through Singapore. So are these other ideas that we could maybe put in place to help businesses then move their products through Singapore as the intermediary, as well as the final destination, as well as for processing, and vice versa? How can we then also raise more awareness in Europe of the cuisine that we enjoy in Singapore, so that the buyers will be more willing to say, okay, yes, let's order the siu mai, because I know it will fly off the shelves. Rather, I don't know what is this product, and should I really order it to sell in the supermarket or in my restaurant or something like that? So just an open discussion, maybe points between Shun Loong and John on this moving forward issue. Anyone free to kickstart?
I'll kick off. Perhaps on the region. I mean, this is a very important benefit of the bilateral FTA. It secures Singapore as the regional logistics and distribution hub for ASEAN, and perhaps even beyond ASEAN. The RCEP, is that how you pronounce it?
Well, I call it RCEP. So,
RCEP, okay, RCEP. I think we welcome it in Europe, to be honest. I don't think it will have a very big impact, frankly, on our trade with the ASEAN countries or the RCEP members, because, you know, by 2025, I expect that the EU will have FTAs with most of the RCEP countries. We have with many already: Korea, Japan, Singapore, Vietnam, Australia, New Zealand coming on stream. In Indonesia, we're negotiating now. So we will have more ambitious FTAs than RCEP with most RCEP countries. The real game changer for RCEP, I think, is that Japan and China are liberalizing trade between themselves. Yeah, but they are both very import-dependent countries when it comes to food. So that will not represent any kind of competitive difficulty for the European Union. Quite the reverse. I think if RCEP had been more ambitious in terms of liberalization, it would have been even better. Frankly, I'm a traditionalist. I think that the rising tide lifts all boats, and I think that could have been the impact of RCEP had it been more ambitious. But let's see. Where I do see a very concrete benefit of RCEP, which will, I think, help Europe, are the trade facilitation rules in RCEP. There's a commitment, I think, that normally all goods will be cleared through customs within 6 hours, I think it is, a few hours. Yeah. So that's a very good modern trade facilitation measure. We negotiated this in the WTO, Elizabeth, a few years ago, and I'm glad to see that in RCEP there is this measure, and that of course will help European exports if we export meat products through Singapore for then onward distribution clearance in Vietnam or Indonesia or the Philippines or elsewhere, those customs facilitation measures will apply to our exports. That they're not reserved for RCEP origin products. So I think we will piggyback a little bit, if you like, on those provisions in RCEP. But when it comes to tariffs, I don't think it will make much difference. We will certainly encourage as much regional integration as possible in the ASEAN region, RCEP is a good starting point, I think, knitting together a set of bilateral FTAs and then with some very useful add-ons.
Thank you very much, John. Just before I hand over to Shun, I was just going to say it occurred to me that while you're talking that yes, Singapore we don't have enough land for the farms, but for those companies who presented to say how maybe they're moving some of their processing. So if you move some of your processing, let's say the sausages, which I love, and I'm so happy to see the Nuremberg sausages in full display now at all our supermarkets. You can maybe even think about, setting up a processing plant in Singapore using the German meat. And then because it's processed in Singapore, it would meet the Singapore rules of origin in RCEP and then move into the RCEP region a bit, just a little step. The tariffs are not coming down as fast as we would like it, but at least you still have a minor competitive advantage as you wait for the direct links between Europe and the rest of Asia. I'll just add on to Shun Loong. Do you have anything that you would like to add about this future scenario?
Thanks, Liz and John, for your views and insights on this particular topic. I just wanted to share two further observations in addition to what John has talked about. I think in terms of G2G trade agreements, and John is right to say that it is not just the RCEP in our region. So many other things that need to be done. And I would say in Singapore, we are tackling it at two levels. First is, apart from RCEP, we have a network of trade agreements, whether point-to-point or regionally or otherwise. So, for a lot of companies that are based here in Singapore, they have that flexibility and almost sort of a redundancy in terms of how they have a whole long list of menu of options to choose from. What makes the best sense for their specific business model and the specific product that they're trying to export. So we do give a lot of options in terms of G2G trade agreements, in addition to RCEP as well. That's number one. Number two, we are also believers that it's not just about a legal agreement between two countries or the number of countries, but it's also got a lot to do with how we implement that agreement and also go down to the level of implementation, to trade facilitation, to goods moving in and out. And like I mentioned just now, for Singapore, we are a trusted food hub in this part of the world, essentially sort of like a regional, distribution node. What we've done is just like the EU. I think the EU wants to ensure that your high health and safety standards are being recognized. It's the same thing here for Singapore. What we've done is we have tried to build a very strong quality and standards infrastructure to ensure that Singapore is trusted when it comes to food supplies. Just one example, we are developing an integrated cold chain management standard, basically to strengthen the supply chain for fresh produce and chilled products. This really speaks to the fact that we are also a transshipment hub for food products in our region. So for example, you could have EU meat products come to Singapore and then you break bulk. It could be one huge piece of meat, and then you cut it up into pieces and distribute it to different parts of Southeast Asia as well. So the transshipment happens that way. And we're happy to provide that high health and safety standard type of process here, so that by the time from Singapore to the next destination, the consumer on the other end has full trust in the quality of the product by that stage. So that's the second thing that we do that I wanted to share. Apart from G2G trade agreements, a network of options for companies to choose from, we also make sure that the plumbing, when the rubber hits the road, everything works. People know that the high health and safety standards that started in the EU. They are very much observed and continue as things get transshipped through Singapore. Yeah. Over back to Liz and John.
Thank you very much. Before we end, Carl, I think there's a question. Is it okay if I move towards that question now?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have a question in the chat box that is asking for more information about the Trusted Traders and Authorized Traders Network. Maybe I can turn to either Shun Loong or John, who may have a better indication on the timeline in which this will develop. But just before that, just to know that in Singapore, we have this AEO Trusted Hub scheme already for a lot of our companies under Tier 1 and the Singapore Customs registration. And so this will, once this is in play with the mutual recognition of the trusted traders in Europe and Singapore, it will flow both ways. John, maybe do you have any insights onto the timeline in which we can expect this to be concluded?
Well, like Singapore, we have a long track record of running a system of authorized economic operators, or trusted traders is a bit more of a user-friendly way to describe them. And it's our expectation that in the next few months we can start to put into a more concrete shape the mutual recognition of our respective systems. Yeah, I mean what we're trying to do with Singapore goes quite far. Sorry, in the sense that we are not simply negotiating and recognizing one by one every company that can be trusted. We're looking at recognizing each other's systems. So that a trusted trader, given that blessing in Europe, will be accepted without much further ado by Singapore, and vice versa. So it's mutual recognition of systems, we think is a very good sort of time and cost saving approach. So I hope we'll see some results of this discussion later in 2021.
That'll be very good. So I would just encourage the companies and the person who asked the question then to register yourself as a trusted trader if you're in Europe under the European scheme, if you're in Singapore under the Singapore scheme, because as John has mentioned, and I've been involved in some of the earlier MRA AEO negotiations, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We don't second guess how you are recognizing it. We just accept that your standards meet our standards, and therefore the companies under the scheme will be mutually recognized. And that really helps the faster to market and the clearance. Hopefully, well, in Singapore, we clear our cargo very, very fast. So normally the question I get back, so what is the little improvement? So think about it as the whole trade facilitation, transshipment area, that once you're a trusted trader, things move much smoother for you. And that's the incentive for you to get on this scheme. Okay, there's another question. Additional education for meat importers or producers when it comes to take advantage. I would say, just for my own personal sense, before I hand over to both speakers as well as for them to give their final words, it actually is awareness raising. I don't know, John, whether you recall when we were both in Geneva before important agricultural weeks, the Europeans used to have a bit of a come and taste my food in the room around room D area, you know, and that was very good at awareness raising, because you suddenly knew, okay, this tastes good, and then maybe, so that sort of simple basic marketing somehow seems to have been overlooked as we grapple with what people think are very technical FTAs, but actually the basic marketing, the basic awareness raising, why is it that you would like to have this, and free samples, as you can see in the supermarket, go a long way into improving sales. So I'll just say, think of this basic marketing ways as a way to make it more palatable. Some of our exporters, because we just did an F&B outreach last week, said that some of the Europeans don't know what our canned luncheon meat is, because it's different from the European one. You know, it's got sauce and stuff like that in it. Some people are not even very sure what a samosa or stuff like that. Maybe the Dutch know, because, you know, they are closer to Indonesia. So any event that you can think of to raise these sort of awareness do a sample, and then maybe we can increase, John, the quota under our Asian cuisine, because that's a test bed. As soon as there's increase in demand in Europe, we can then G to G see how we can further facilitate this. But there still needs to be a starting point. So that's me. Before I turn over to John and Shun Loong to maybe answer that question, as well as for your final words as we wrap up this session. Maybe I'll start with Shun Loong first, because we were with John just now. Shun Loong?
Thanks, Liz. I just have one comment, actually. I think it's really got to do with building awareness. I fully agree with you. And I think there have already been quite a number of efforts underway between ourselves and colleagues in the Commission, including with John's team as well. I think the last few major EU-Singapore FTA outreach events, what we also tried to do is to make it a delicious event as well. And we took the opportunity to feature a lot of EU food and drink products, and basically to encourage industry persons here in Singapore to be exposed to all these wider variety of EU food and drink products, and to consider whether those might be of interest to Singapore consumers as well as consumers in the region. So we usually try to do that. We've been doing that quite judiciously, and I suspect what we can do going forward is to figure out how we can have a cooperative sort of outreach effort where we feature both EU and Singapore food products side by side, because for the Singapore and Asian consumer who is more familiar with Singaporean food and drink products, they could use that and start off from there and then see, hey, this goes well with an EU food and drink product as well. Maybe it could be a pairing of Asian food, Singaporean food with EU, meats or wines or spirits. And then after that, some magic can happen where essentially people start integrating all these EU food and drink products into their particular menus at home and also out in the restaurants too. So I think there's a lot of room for awareness building, for business matching events, for both the EU and Singapore side to come together to organize a lot more outreach efforts. Over to you, John.
Well, I can only second what you say. Really, the FTA is one thing, but awareness raising, getting the consumers to understand what is available on the market, and promotion is really key. And as you said, when the FTA came into force, we had quite a big promotional gig in Singapore. My commissioner was there. And it was all over the newspapers. It was in the Straits Times, and it was a very, very helpful, first boost to the FTA in the food and drink area. The COVID has sort of hampered a little bit our efforts on promotion, because we've not been able to go to food fairs or they've been closed. But I think looking forward to later in this year, we have the intention to bring a big food and drink business delegation to Singapore and Vietnam in the autumn, COVID permitting, to really start to sell and promote the FTAs with both Singapore and Vietnam. And we would be very, very keen to work with Singapore for you to promote your products, your food in Europe. I mean, Chinese food is very well known in Europe. Thai food is very well known, but in fact, Singapore is really the culinary capital of Asean. As far as I can see, you've got such a fantastic blend of different cuisines from the broader region, and European consumers don't know this enough. Yeah, and I hope that with the FTA will also in a way increase Europeans traveling to Singapore, as tourists, because then when tourists go to Singapore, they taste the food and they want it when they get back home in Europe. Yeah, that's what we've seen with China, with Japan, Thailand. So I think there's the FTA and the relationship we have with Singapore. We need to really look at it from the travel and tourism and transport point of view. And not just simply bilateral food trade, and then we can stimulate more interest in Europe in Singapore's fantastic food products. So we'd be very keen to help you to promote them in Europe going forward.
Just want to jump in to thank John for your offer, and likewise here in Singapore, we are very keen to help promote, EU food and drink products as well. And like you accurately mentioned, we are, very keen to diversify our food sources as well. So we do welcome EU food exporters to do more to Singapore and through Singapore as well. And I would say, if we can set up yet another delicious event once circumstances permit, certainly all for it. And we hope to, welcome you to Singapore as well.
Thank you very much, Shun Loong and John, for those final words and very optimistic words. And every time we talk about food, there's nothing but joy, because it's always good to be able to taste and sample and enjoy, and in that way understand each other better, because food is also an expression of culture, and that's what the FTA is trying to do, bring us both together as we understand each other so much better. So it just leaves me to thank both of you all for all your wonderful insights and sharing. I hope it's given the companies listening food for thought as to what they can then take forward. Hopefully at next events when we can do it not just via video cam, although the advantage is that I can get John here rather than having him fly in, so there's pros and cons, but one of the things we can think about is how to do a food day, maybe a Europe food day, a Singapore food day, as we explore further collaboration and get the companies to be aware of the business potential in selling the respective cuisine of each other. So thank you all very much, and thank you very much to the audience for listening to this session, and I hope you have benefited from it, and we can see an increase in enjoyment of meat products between the countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear friends. Thank you.
Thank you as well.